Hello guys, Grumpy. Welcome back to another Feed the Beast tutorial. Today we're going to be covering some more EU power concepts. I'm going to show you how to make a smart power grid. So we have a problem. I'm going to show you the problem, then I'm going to show you the solution to the problem. So here's the problem. We have 8 generators right here, and they're all loaded with cold coke. Now down here, we have a completely charged MFSU. And down here, we have a macerator. And so let's see what happens. Let's put a piece of cobblestone in here. Cooked almost instantly. So there was a brief momentary demand on the power grid. This MFSU drained just a little bit. But all 8 of these generators kicked on. And here's the thing. We consumed 8 pieces of cold coke to macerate 1 piece of cobblestone. So that's not a good thing. So if you're using a lot of generators for power, especially early on in the game, you're going to be wasting a lot of cold coke. You can't really automate it like this. Well, this isn't automated at all, actually. So that's our problem. We're wasting a lot of cold coke. So how do we fix this? Well, we do it down here like this. Right here we have an MFE. Now this MFE stores the electricity. Notice it's not charged up all the way. It's only partially charged. We actually don't want it to charge up all the way. What it does, though, here's what it does. Whenever there's a demand on the power grid and these generators have to kick on, and then that demand goes away, these generators will still be on. And so this MFE will store all that electricity. So right now, as you can see, there's 67,000 EU in there. So that's actually what happened. These generators kicked on, the demand went away, and this excess was stored here. So we didn't waste any electricity this way. So let's go ahead and come down here and flip this switch. Let's say there's a brief momentary demand like we had down there. So now we had 67,000 EU. Let's see, we can see it draining right here. So we just used up 20,000 EU. Now down here, I'm using an MFSU just to simulate a demand on the power grid. Down there I had a macerator, but over here I'm using MFSU. And I'm just flipping the switch on. So whenever I flip this switch, it creates a demand, and all the stuff down here will send EU down this way. So let's go over how this works. Now first of all, ignore this right here. This thing right here actually creates a problem, and this right here is the solution. I have it temporarily disconnected because it's easier to understand if you ignore this part first. So let's go over the basics of how this works. Here we have our MFSU, and up here we have a button. If we click this button, we can change conditions. So what we want to do is click it to where it says behavior emit if empty. So I don't want to do that because it's going to screw up this circuit. But basically, this thing is set to put out a redstone signal whenever it's empty. So whenever it's empty, what it's going to do is this circuit's going to turn on this switch. The switch is off right now. When we turn the switch on, all 12 generators will fire up. Now, I do need to mention this real quick. There's a reason I picked 12 generators. 12 generators, each of these put out 10 EU per tick, so that's a grand total of 120 EU per tick. This MFE can output 128 EU per tick. So these things will never quite be able to keep up. So 12 is probably the most you ever want to put on here. You might get away with 1 or 2 more, but 12 is the most. What the condition you're trying to avoid is you don't ever want this thing to charge up completely, because if it's charged up completely and these generators are on, it means you're wasting electricity. And so this way it won't charge up completely. So if we come down here once again, we got 47,000 EU. If we create a momentary demand on the power grid, it doesn't fire up the generators. It's getting it from this MFE instead. So what happens if we actually let it drain all the way? Well, if we let it drain all the way, this MFE, this thing will put out a redstone signal. This thing right here is called the pulse former. What it's going to do is when it detects a transition on this line from low to high, it's going to put out a brief pulse. And that's going to make this state cell fire off. Now all the state cell is kind of like a timer. If you pulse it, it's going to time off for whatever you got it set for. So right now it is set for 78 seconds. Now that's not a number I made up. There's a reason it's set to 78 seconds. So let me go over that real quick. A piece of cold coke takes 80 seconds to burn up. So I set it 78. That gives it like a 2-second safety factor, because you want to make sure that this switch shuts off before this coal gets burned up. So that way it doesn't start burning another piece of coal. So after 78 seconds this shuts off, and after a couple more seconds the generators shut off. So you might be wondering, why do we need this pulse former? Well, let me go over that briefly over here. So let me get that redstone torch right here. Now here's the output of the state cell, and here's the input. If you notice that the output went high, but yet this pointer's not moving. The pointer doesn't start moving until it loses a redstone signal. So this thing right here is set for 5 seconds. So what happens is, when you, let's say we put this torch here. Right now, let's say we put the torch there for 5 seconds, then we remove the torch. This thing counts down. So what happens is, this thing doesn't actually put out a signal for 5 seconds. It puts out a signal for 10 seconds. Because we had 5 seconds when it was in this condition. So what the pulse former does is it makes sure this thing times for exactly what you want it to do. Because this thing only puts out a pulse. It doesn't put out a steady high signal. This thing will. So the pulse former will trigger this thing, and it's going to time off for 78 seconds. You'll burn up a piece of coal, and this thing will shut off right before that coal gets burned up. So if we had like this thing was empty, or close to empty, and well, actually let's turn it on. Let's go ahead and do that. We're going to empty this sucker out finally. Let's see if that was enough. It's draining pretty quick, because this thing puts out 512 EU per tick. So okay, that was enough. You see that line right there momentarily went high? That was enough to make this thing start counting. So we're burning up a piece of coal. So this when that thing went high, it turned on the state cell. Turned on the switch. The switch is on. This thing right here is charging back up now. And this thing right here is going to turn off a couple seconds right before this coal gets consumed. And so that way we don't waste any coal. So that's a very elegant solution if you just want to macerate a piece of coal. But here's a problem. What if there was a large demand on the power grid? Like what if it was a long demand? Like, say, instead of just a couple seconds, what if we needed power from the generators for like 5 minutes straight? Well, if we had that huge demand, this thing is going to drain. It's going to stay drained. But after 78 seconds, this thing will cut off. What will happen is the circuit will break. So in other words, this thing will be completely drained, and this will be off. It'll never have a chance to recharge this. And because this thing only puts out a pulse, the instant this thing drains, the circuit's broke. The generators will never switch back on. So we have to have a way to switch the generators on when there's a high demand or a long demand. So let me show you how we do that. We do it like with this circuit right here. All this is a NOT gate and a timer. So let's go back over to here. The instant this thing drains, it puts out a redstone signal. If we come down here and follow it, it goes to this NOT gate. What this NOT gate does is inverts the signal. So as you can see right now, that's off, this is on. If the input was on, the output would be off. Well, the timer actually has what's called an active low input. What that means is it activates whenever there's not a signal. So as you can see right here, there actually is a signal on the input of the timer, so the timer is off. So if this thing drains completely, this NOT gate goes low, and this timer switches on. Now this timer is set to 82 seconds. Now 82 seconds is slightly longer than the amount of time it takes to burn a piece of coal. So you set this one a little bit shorter. You set it for 78 seconds. You set this one a little bit longer, 82 seconds. And so now, after 82 seconds, this thing will spin around, and after 82 seconds, it puts out a pulse. If you look right here, the pulse is like right here. So if there's a really long demand on the power grid, here's what happens. Okay, this line goes high. That instantly turns on this state cell, which instantly burns up a piece of coal. But remember, with our condition, we have a 5-minute demand on the power grids. So after 78 seconds, this thing cuts off. But after 82 seconds, this thing spins around, puts out a pulse, and it reactivates the state cell. So this circuit right here keeps the state cell going as long as this MFE is drained. This MFE will stay drained as long as there's a high demand on the power grid. It's not going to start charging up until everything in front of it's charged up. And so, once again, I'll go over it once again just to make sure. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be redundant, but it's a little complicated concept if you're kind of new or maybe intermediate and you're not really good with red power logic. But if you have a demand on the power grid, this thing will drain eventually. If you have a high demand on the power grid anyway. Once this thing drains, this thing puts out a logic high signal. This thing puts out a pulse, turns the state cell on for 78 seconds, which in turn turns on the switch, which makes the generators go off. After 78 seconds, this thing switches off this, and so the generators will switch back off. But if this thing is still drained after 78 seconds, this thing will put out a pulse after 82 seconds. Now there is going to be a little downtime, a little bit of wasted energy, but nowhere near as much as we had over there because, well, if we turn this off after 78 seconds, these generators are going to run for 2 seconds and the power is going to go off in the Never Never Land. But actually it won't be even quite 2 seconds because these things have a delay from when they receive a signal. So in other words, if I break this, you saw there was like a half-second delay there. And let me put this back. Watch her. It doesn't always delay, but most of the time it does. There's like a half-second delay. So that's why we have this set there, just to be safe. We got a 2-second setting there. But anyway, let me go into creative mode. And I'm going to fly up and let you guys look at this circuit. And so this might help you to, if you want to build it yourself. There's basically the layout of it. This is called an EU splitter, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that. There's an MFE. It's set to emit when empty. Here we have a pulse former, a NOT gate, a timer set to 82 seconds. Here we have a state cell set to 78 seconds, a NOT gate. And one last thing before we go. A piece of coal coke takes 80 seconds to burn. So for that case, you want to set this for 78 and this for 82. If you plan on using something else, like say coal, for example, coal takes 20 seconds to burn in a generator. You'd want to set this one for 18 seconds and you'd want to set this one for 22 seconds. But I hope you found this tutorial helpful. It's a way to keep, if you want to make a coal power plant, this is a great way to keep from wasting any of it. If you enjoyed this video, found it useful or any of that, please give it a like. It helps my channel out. More views and stuff like that I get, the more motivated I am to make more tutorials. So, this is Grumpy. I appreciate all you guys watching, all your feedback, commenting, support.